Ah, yes, the humble pinwheel. A childhood delight, and in my case, a reminder of the summer fete of '72, when my homemade version exploded in a flamboyant display of aerodynamic incompetence. Aunt Millicent still winces at the sound of foil, but here we are, years later, recreating the very same whirling contraption in Blender, though this time without the risk of blinding a pensioner. Geometry nodes, you see, allows us to replicate the hypnotic spin of a pinwheel with far fewer injuries and considerably more maths. Joy. Frankly, it is the most fun one can have with spinning objects without involving the authorities. Welcome to Blending with Algernon. I am Sir Algernon, Blender instructor extraordinaire, and this is Freddy, my partner in crime, confusion, and questionable decisions. Think, Sherlock Holmes, if he brought the mystery instead of solving it. Say hello, Freddy. We will be working in Blender version 4.40, available for free at blender.org. Right then, let's switch on the screencast keys for those watching at home who fancy the thrilling experience of knowing exactly which mistakes were made and how. Freddy, shall we keep the default scene items? No, of course not. Let's split the view in half. In the top half, create a mesh plane to house our geometry node setup. In the bottom, switch to the geometry node editor. Press New and like magic, we have our geometry node. It's even been added to our modifier stack. How clever. Let's rename it something sensible to get things organized. Call it Pinwheel. Well done, Freddy. Stellar work, truly. Now let's kindly show the geometry input node the door, as it's about as useful to us now as a chocolate teapot. In its place, we'll summon a curve line node and connect it to the geometry output. This, dear viewer, is the exact moment our humble pinwheel draws its first breath. Poetic, really, if you're into polygons. Let's lay our line flat along the x-axis, while also increasing its length to about 4 meters, but keep it centered on our world origin. Set the start x to -2 and the end x to 2. Also the z to 0 to lay it flat. To our humble line, let's add an instance on points node with another curve line node to sprout some additional lines. Perfect, but 2 lines shall not a pinwheel make. Add a resample curves node and increase the count to around 32. Now we're getting somewhere. Let's lay these new lines flat also. In the second curve line node we added, change the start y to -2 and the end y to 2, while setting z to 0. This will flatten and elongate our new lines. Let's switch to a top view and give our new lines some substance. Create a curve to mesh node and place it after our instances on points node. To the profile curve, add a curve circle. Interesting, but not quite up to scratch. Let's give it a proper tweak. Drop the resolution to 3 and shrink the radius to 0.02, keeping things neat and tidy, as always. Right, here's the plan. We'll use a material shader to splash streaks of color along our lines. The tricky part? Convincing the shader which part of the line gets the fancy treatment at any given moment. Luckily, we can pass along each point's location using a stored named attribute. Basically, giving the shader a handy map of the line's progress. And where does this magical factor come from, you ask? Why, from the ever-reliable spline parameter node, of course. Add a store named attribute node and give it a sensible name, such as line factor. Then add the spline parameter node and connect factor to value, just as Freddy is doing. Hop over to the Material shader and create a new material in the Material tab of the Properties panel. Click New and give it a good memorable name, such as Line Glow. Now remember that attribute we so lovingly crafted earlier. Time to put it to work. Drop in an attribute node, set the name to line factor, just like we did back in the geometry editor. Connect the color output to both the alpha and emission color on the principled BSDF. While we're here, let's crank the emission strength up to a hearty 50, because subtlety had its chance. Now switch the viewport shading to rendered and we see absolutely nothing. Why? Because Freddy forgot to set the material in the geometry node. Let's switch back and do that now. Add a set material node and select line glow. There you have it, working as advertised. Switch back to the material editor for refinements. You'll notice the bottom edge of our lines fade ever so dramatically to black. That's because the line factor starts at 0 and increases up the line. Very obedient. Now, we can actually use that to our advantage with a trusty color ramp. Let's drop one in and work some gradient magic. Make sure the color output from our shiny new color ramp is hooked up to both the alpha and emission color, just like before. Now, as Freddy slides those handles with the precision of a man diffusing a trifle, we can adjust how our gradient behaves. Add another slider to the color ramp and drag it all the way to the far right. Set it to black. Voila! We now have a gradient at both the top and bottom of each line. Very symmetrical, very useful. Now, let's show a bit of taste and swap that blinding white for something more agreeable, say a nice green. And finally, drop in a math node which we'll be using for a bit of control. By adding a value between 0 and 1 to our attribute, we can shift the position of that lovely green glow along the lines. Very slick. We'll circle back to this in a moment. For now, we need to tweak our geometry node's setup to capture the index of each line. Why? So we can offset the glow individually on a per-line basis. It shall all become clear in a moment. Let's clear a bit of space and drop in another store-named attribute node. Name it line index. We'll be calling on that later like a well-trained but slightly chaotic butler. Now add an index node and plug that into the value input. Crucially, since we're dealing with the index of the instance points, we need to set the store-named attribute type to instance as well. Otherwise, Blender will politely ignore our efforts and carry on without us. Now, back in the shader editor, where the real sorcery happens, we'll sprinkle in a bit more maths and summon our freshly minted line index attribute to work its magic. First, create an attribute node and reference the line index. Don't forget, set the attribute type to instancer, or Blender will once again pretend it has no idea what you're talking about. Next, add a math node and set it to multiply. Connect the color output to one of its inputs, then hook the multiply node into the add node we set up earlier. Now, as you adjust the multiplier, you'll notice the lines shift with an offset, precisely what we're after. Lovely stuff. But wait, there's more. Add another math node, set this one to add, and pop it between the multiply and the original add node. Now we've got the multiply node handling the offset effect, and the new add node ready for animation control. Brilliant. Utterly civilized shader wizardry. Now, drop in a value node. This will be the engine behind our animation. Set its value to #frame divided by 50, just to keep things moving at a dignified pace. Plug this into the add node we set up for animation, and hit play for a quick test. If things look a bit too frantic or too sleepy, tweak the multiply node controlling the offset for a smoother result. Now for the £1,000,000 question. How do we get those lines to loop? Simple. Make some space and add yet another math node. This time set it to the rather niche but surprisingly charming option. Flawed modulo. It's like regular modulo, but one that's been utterly dumbfounded. Set this value between 0 and 1, and it'll neatly loop the animation, repeating the line movement like a well-trained boomerang. Smaller values break the animation into short, punchy segments, while larger values let it breathe, longer, smoother, and far more dramatic. For our purposes here, let's keep it simple and go with a nice even split at 0.5, the Goldilocks zone of animation looping. So far, so good, but I hear you muttering, that doesn't look a thing like a pinwheel. Fear not. A few minor adjustments in the geometry node's setup, and suddenly all shall be right with the world. Right at the beginning, ditch the curve line and bring in a curve circle instead. Trust me, it makes all the difference. Admittedly, it looks a bit like roadkill right now, but no worries. A quick align rotation to vector node will sort it out. Let's pop one in and fix the mess. We'll hook it up to the instance on points node under rotation. A curve tangent node will provide the right vector coordinates. It might look like an exotic bird's nest right now, but switch the rotation axis from Z to X, and suddenly everything's right with the world. Right, Freddy? Hit play on the timeline and let's see what we've got. We're nearly there. That pinwheel feeling is definitely in the air now. Right, Freddy, time to add some pulsating flair. Maths is calling, isn't it? Let's create a value node tied to our frames. Set it to hashtag frame divided by 50. Then toss in a math node set to sine for a bit of undulating fun. Plug the value into the sine node's input and feed the output into the radius. And just like that, the pinwheel starts to breathe. Wonderful. But let's make it more wonderful with another math node. Set it to add, and add 3 to the sine for a widening inner circle. Yes, we're getting there. Let's increase the frames to 1,000 so we can see our pinwheel evolve. It looks like a windmill on steroids. I love it. While we're here, let's knock the resolution of our curve circle down to about 6. Gives the pinwheel a bit more of that high-tech, designed in a lab by overpaid engineers aesthetic. Time to give our pinwheel a proper spin, literally. Make some breathing room, drop in a transform geometry node, and hook up a combine XYZ node to its rotation input. Now plug the value node into the Z input. Since we're viewing it top-down, that's the only axis that needs to get fancy. A bit of spin, a touch of flair, lovely. Now we're taking things up a notch. Time to give our pinwheel a twin. Let's make a bit of room toward the end of our node setup. We're just going to duplicate these 3 nodes for our second set of lines. Nothing too scandalous. Take the output of the original curve to mesh node and plug it into the set material node of the new duplicate chain. Also, grab that value node we used for rotation and plug it into the new combine XYZ node so this second pinwheel can have a spin of its own. But let's have it spin in the opposite direction, shall we? Drop in a math node, set it to multiply, and multiply the value by -1. A little mathematical mischief for perfectly mirrored motion. Naturally, our elegant little twin deserves its own wardrobe. So head over to the Materials tab, duplicate our Line Glow material, and christen the new one Line Glow 2. Then don't forget to switch the set material node in the second set of lines to use Line Glow 2. Can't have them showing up to the same scene in identical shaders. It's simply uncouth. Now let's join our twins with a join geometry node, and then jump back to the shader editor for some tweaking. Make sure you've got Line Glow 2 selected. Wouldn't want to accidentally give our original a makeover. Now, swap that green in the color ramp for a nice punchy blue. While you're at it, let's spice up the pacing. Drop the flawed modulo value down to around 0.25 to create short, snappy bursts, like a strobe light, but more tasteful. Go back to the geometry editor and let's see what we've got. Bit hard to see, isn't it? Let's switch the background to full black, gives our glowing lines the spotlight they deserve. Then hop over to the compositor editor, tick Use Nodes, and drop in a glare node. Set it to Fog Glow, because nothing says cinematic masterpiece like a little over-the-top bloom. We're getting there. Now let's give our twins a twin, because clearly one pair of spinning neon noodles simply won't do. In the outliner, select the original plane and duplicate it. Move the new one slightly below the original and scale it up just a touch. Subtle drama. Next, in the modifier stack of the new plane, duplicate the geometry nodes modifier and rename it Pinwheel 2. This way, we can tinker freely without upsetting the delicate genius of the first. Finally, pop over to the Geometry Node Editor and make sure you're working in Pinwheel too. Nothing worse than making a dozen changes and realizing you were fiddling with the wrong node tree again. Make some room for our changes. Let's tuck away our original plane mesh for a moment so we can lavish some attention on its newly spawned sibling. First, bump up the curve circle's radius to around 0.12. Bigger, bolder, better. Now, drop in a set curve radius node. This little gem lets us meddle with the thickness of our lines. Next, toss in a spline parameter node and connect the factor output to the radius input. Voila, instant spikiness. Like a neon sea urchin, but more fashionable. Now, wander back to the sign math node at the start of our geometry escapade and swap it out for its slightly moodier sibling, cosine. This reverses our undulation effect, like flipping the vibe from upbeat disco to smooth synthwave. While we're at it, let's widen that inner circle just a tad by cranking the add value up to 4. More space, more grace, and far fewer glowing noodles bumping into each other. Now let's give this second twin a set of its own materials. Back in the Material tab, duplicate our Line Glow material twice and rename the copies Line Glow 3 and Line Glow 4. Of course, don't forget to reset the two set material nodes accordingly. Back in the shader editor, let's start with Line Glow 3. Set the center color in the color ramp to a nice pinkish and change the repetition in the floor modulo to 0.25. For Line Glow 4, let's go with an orangey gold and a floored modulo of 0.1. Right then, let's unhide our original twin and bask in the luminous splendor of our creation. Look at that. Positively marvelous. We're inching ever closer to greatness, Freddy, almost like we know what we're doing. Let's drop in a camera so we can actually see what we're doing. Always helpful. Frame it up nicely, then hit Control plus Alt plus numpad 0 to lock it in. Perfect time for a test render, and to confirm whether we're still madly in love with our glowing, spinning monstrosity. Freddy, it's so dazzling, it's practically begging for a soundtrack. Let's oblige, shall we? Hop into the video sequencer, drag the playhead back to the start, and add a music track via add sound. Because if this doesn't deserve an epic score, I don't know what does. I have a perfect little ditty for our pinwheel that I composed the other day while sipping lukewarm tea and pretending I knew what half these nodes actually do. For your pinwheel, feel free to use whatever score takes your breath away. We'll be using this one, which is available from the link below. Whatever sonic masterpiece you choose, do take note of its length. In frames, of course. Ours clocks in at a majestic 3,536 frames, which means our dazzling pinwheel must twirl precisely that long. Head over to the render settings under Frame Range and set the start to 1 and the end to match your track's duration. No more, no less, we're artists, not anarchists. For output, we'll render a sequence of crisp PNGs into a designated folder. Later, we'll pull those back into the video sequencer like the organized geniuses we pretend to be. Now hit render animation, sit back and reward yourself with a proper cup of tea. Milk in first or last. I won't judge. Much. Once our frame sequence is completed, head back to the video sequencer and rewind. Under the Add drop-down, select Image Sequence. Navigate to your output folder and select all the images. Then press Add Image Strip. You should have one channel with your soundtrack and another with your image sequence. If all looks good, change the render output file format to FFmpeg video. Open the encoding and set according to your preferences. Don't forget to select an audio codec as well, or you'll have no sound. Select a location to render to, give it a proper name, and under View, select Sequence Render Animation. Time for that second cup of tea. And there we have it. A gloriously glowing, musically synchronized, twin-spinning pinwheel of questionable practicality and undeniable charm. You've navigated a labyrinth of nodes, dabbled in shader wizardry, and possibly cursed more than once along the way. But you made it. Bravo. This has been Blending with Algernon, where chaos meets creativity, and somehow it all sort of works out in the end. If you enjoyed this delightful descent into node-based madness, do consider liking, subscribing, and sharing with anyone else who enjoys glowing lines and mild existential dread. As always, the working files are linked below, because I care about your sanity. Now go forth, tweak, break things, fix them again, and most importantly, pretend it was all intentional.